The realms of the ancient Near East have long been esteemed as the land of the horse. Indeed, many great empires have arisen on the saddles of an elite cavalry force. By contrast, their infantry seldom receive praise and are often looked down upon as weak chaff troops. Yet, scattered across the Eastern Territories were many mountain tribes who boasted a heritage of close combat. Among the greatest of these were the warriors of Daylam, who arose under the Sassanids, not only as fearsome heavy infantry mercenaries and core battlefield units, but also as the elite guard of great kings. Today, we shall review their origins, their equipment, training, tactics, and service history. This is the story of the Daylamite warriors.
You can lead your own elite forces into epic battles with today's sponsor, World of Warships Legends. It's a massive multiplayer naval combat game which requires both strategic thinking and quick reflexes to rule the waves. PvP battles range from massive 9v9 duels to wild 4-way free-for-alls, where you'll want to carefully scout your enemy, strategically target weak points, and finally close in for the kill. With console play, you can enjoy this glorious action on the big screen. Naval gameplay is given great depth by fleets composed of 4 main ship classes: the swift-moving destroyers, the well-rounded cruisers, the fortress battleships, and the versatile aircraft carriers. The game already boasts over 400 ships, 100 commanders, 10 nations, and more than 20 maps. But on top of this, you get regular fleet expansions, new ships, and fresh missions. It's easy to get into, with endless opportunities to explore and compete against millions of players. World of Warships Legends is actually celebrating its 5th anniversary with ancient Greece-style festivities. These include the Treasure Hunt web event, the new crafting station, and the Aegean Arrow campaign, which yields new unique rewards like the Divine Commander Guises. Exciting new features are also rolling out, like the US Hybrid Battleship line and the First Fleet's Cup tournament. So get started today by clicking the link in the description below and enjoy a welcome package using our code for these awesome rewards. Enjoy!
The lands of Iran consist largely of a vast highland plateau bordered by great mountain belts. These regions are famed for the horsemen who came to master their open steppes. And yet not all followed in their tracks. This was especially true of the tribes which took shelter in the various mountain ranges, which proved far less conducive to such mounted traditions. Such peoples thus evolved their own forms of warfare. One of the most notable of these groups would be the inhabitants of northern Iran, a highland region between the southern Caspian Sea and the Alborz mountain range. It is a land of topographic extremes, with the terrain rising abruptly from sea level to a max of 5,600 meters within just 100 kilometers. The towering Alborz thus serves as a giant wall which catches moisture from the Caspian Sea, resulting in wet northern slopes filled with streams, marshes, tributary valleys, and lush Hyrcanian forests. Here one could once find many tigers, bears, wolves, boars, deer, and all manner of other creatures flying in the skies or swimming in the waters. Archaeology reveals a long history of human presence in the region dating back to the Lower Paleolithic. The peoples which arose in this area were a hardy folk who initially survived on subsistence hunting and cattle herding, before eventually developing into a series of martial tribes. Each group was ruled by chiefs or local kings, which fiercely guarded their independence. As a result of their isolation from the self-proclaimed civilized regions, such mountain folk were seen by outsiders as wild barbarians. And yet the two would soon find themselves entwined. For instance, when the Median Empire arose around the 8th century BC, it would reportedly clash with the peoples of the southern Caspian. Unfortunately, no details remain of this exchange. The conflict was likely hard-fought owing to the defensible nature of the terrain, and outright conquest of the more remote tribes is doubtful. Whatever the case, it seems that some sort of vassalage or tributary system was established. When the later Achaemenid Empire arose in the 6th century BC, it would be Cyrus the Great who conquered and divided this region into several administrative provinces. In the event that wars arose, the King of Kings would draw from its sturdy stock of warriors. For instance, the Hyrcanians are listed by Herodotus as part of King Xerxes' invasion force during the Second Greco-Persian War, and by Arrian in King Darius's army at Gaugamela during the conquests of Alexander the Great. Over the following centuries, the region along the southern Caspian would trade hands as various empires came and went. Most were rather fleeting, and their control of the tribes tenuous at best. Even when the Parthians managed to establish a more long-lived empire starting in the 3rd century BC, they failed to fully leverage the power of the mountain tribes due to their focus on maintaining largely mounted forces. This military doctrine would change in the 3rd century AD with the following Sassanid Empire. Whilst still maintaining a staple of cavalry units, they leaned more heavily upon the hybrid cultures within their domain to deploy a mixed arms approach to warfare. Just as the Romans of the East were slowly learning to add more cavalry to the mix, so too were the Sassanids adding more heavy infantry. Thus, in their search for an elite infantry corps, they came upon the yet untapped power of the Daylamites. Daylam was the name of a mountainous region of the modern Iranian province of Gilan. Owing to its comparatively infertile lands and rough terrain, many here were forced to eke out a living through hard labor as woodsmen and fishermen. Even their leaders were said to share in these trials. Apparently, a Persian envoy was once shocked to have found a high chieftain working barefoot in the rice fields, wearing patched trousers and a ragged tunic. Such an environment and lifestyle made the Daylamites tough, determined, and enterprising. Scarcity at home, in turn, left them eager to seek fortunes abroad by loaning out their skills as mercenaries. Thus, they made excellent raw material for soldiers. Once embraced by the Sassanids and later caliphates, the Daylamites would be forged into a formidable professional force capable of standing toe-to-toe with even the Romans in close quarters. So what did these soldiers look like? Initially, they came to battle as lightly equipped infantry. However, over time their standards would gradually be raised in proportion to their esteem, eventually boasting gear and regalia similar to that of prestige cavalry units. It should be noted that the Daylamites were in service for many centuries, and thus any specific depiction would not hold true in all cases. With that being said, we can present an indicative snapshot of how they may have looked in the peak Sassanid period. As a base, they wore boots, trousers, and likely a shirt or padded vest. Over this was worn lamellar armor or chainmail hauberks. These were secured by decorated belts and probably chest bands, seen more commonly among elite cavalry. Heads, meanwhile, were protected by Spangenhelm-style helmets, possibly with accompanying face and neck armor, in addition to decorative Sassanian ribbons. Finally, they carried large oval or round shields with bright colors and distinctive decorations, as depicted on the Ark of Galerius. Evidence suggests such gear was further adorned with gold ornaments and other forms of regalia. In terms of offense, they seem to have used a wide arsenal of weapons. One of these was the Zupin short spear, which was said to have a blade on both ends. These could be used both as javelins to hurl at the enemy or to stab in close quarters. They are also known to have carried the tabazin, the traditional battle axe of Persia. Its head sported one or two crescent-shaped blades, which was affixed atop a thin metal handle. Typically these were 3 feet long, but variants are known to exist up to 7 feet tall. Swords were also quite common and seem to have leveraged the lappet suspension system of their mounted peers. At range, these warriors may also have used bows or slings. Thus, they stood as formidably equipped warriors. This was especially true of the most elite Daylamite units, which came to serve as the bodyguards of kings, known as the Gond-i-Shahansha. Such men wore some of the best gear of their era, leveraging the skilled metal workers of the Sassanid Empire, which rivaled the best foundries of India and China. According to Dr. Manucher Kosani, it's possible that they even bore some of the earliest forms of Damascus steel, known as Sharpuragan. But how were the Daylamites organized and trained? As with their gear, this would have varied greatly over time. We can begin with organization. Generally speaking, it seems that they began as a fierce but unruly and ill-disciplined warband. Yet as they joined the Sassanid armed forces, or Espar, and were exposed to the methods of large-scale warfare and pitched battle, their ways began to change. The exact methods by which this occurred are not well understood. Researchers believe that the infantry wing of the army was commanded by a Paigan Salar, who was ranked second beneath the Framadar Savaran, in charge of the cavalry. The infantry itself was then subdivided into several classifications, including the heavy troops of the Paigan, the light troops of the Nazir Daran, and the foot archers. It seems that the Daylamites were part of and eventually displaced the traditional heavy troops of the Paigan upon their rise around the 6th century AD. Within their ranks there would have been various tiers of organizing the men, though these details go unrecorded. Here they served as professional infantrymen who would have been well trained and drilled. Unfortunately, we know little of their practices. However, our sources indicate that they were held in high esteem and may have even been registered in state rolls and paid in cash in a similar manner to elite cavalry. If they also shared in the same rigors of cavalry training, then it certainly would have been robust. This likely included tenets of the ancient Iranian martial arts and traditions such as the famed Zor-Khaneh. These emphasized strength, discipline, courage, and moral conduct. Training may have involved the familiar activities of wrestling, running, push-ups, and even ancient weightlifting. When these Daylamites came together, their unit-level training revolved around forming a tight phalanx, which would present a shield wall to the enemy. In battle, they took up position in the traditional location of the Paigan, which some scholars believe consisted of both light and heavy subgroups. In the early years, this may have meant standing just behind the archer line as a force which could protect its lighter brethren and be prepared to close the distance once the enemy lines had been sufficiently weakened. In later years, however, the Paigan evolved into a more distinctly heavy infantry force, which formed the solid core of the Sassanids' new three-part battle formation. In this capacity, they remained largely on the defensive as a bastion around which the wings and vanguard forces could reform between attacks. However, the Daylamites could also find themselves deployed more dynamically. One favored tactic of Sassanid commanders was to have the heavy troops paired closely behind advancing cavalry units. Here, the Savaran would threaten a charge, forcing the enemy to prepare to repel mounted troops. At this point, the screen of riders would peel off to the sides, revealing a charge by heavy infantry. This sort of tactic was excellent at keeping the enemy off balance and, with the Sassanid advantage in mobility, could be delivered across various vectors of the battlefield to devastating effect. Beyond this, we also see such heavy infantry taking up a range of roles. This included accompanying the Sassanid Elephant Corps into battle as a support force, which would help prevent these living tanks from being surrounded and overwhelmed in the thick of combat. Other times we see such heavy infantry being used as shock troops or being tasked with special operations. This was especially key during siege warfare, in which the Daylamites proved highly proficient. Using the battle for Dura Europos as an example, we might expect such troops to help storm the walls or infiltrate them through subterranean passages. Such was the increasing prestige of the Daylamites that they even became elevated as elite bodyguards to the King of Kings. With this understanding in mind, let us now turn to a review of their service history. As previously stated, we know that the Sassanids would be the first ones to fully integrate the Daylamites into their military. This process was, however, gradual and most likely only began in earnest around 520 AD, when the eldest son of King Kavad I was appointed to rule their lands. This timing would prove fortuitous, as shortly thereafter a 6-year war erupted between the Romans and Sassanids. Much of the fighting was concentrated around the border regions of northwestern Mesopotamia and Armenia. In these matters, Daylamite forces under a Daylamite general reportedly participated in the Iberian campaign to re-establish control over this northern territory. Here, mountainous terrain and a chain of forts served as an excellent proving ground for the heavy infantrymen. The value of the Daylamites is made clear by their repeated deployment in the wars which would continue to erupt along this front over the years. For instance, during the reign of Khusro I, they saw action in the 20-year Lazic War, which once more saw them fighting against Romans in the passes and fortifications of the region. The Daylamite excellence even caught the attention of Procopius, who noted their contributions to the siege of Archaeopolis in 552 AD. Soon, their military prowess would see the scope of their campaigns grow even larger. In 570 AD, several hundred Daylamites were reportedly part of the Sassanid Expeditionary Force, which sailed around the Arabian Peninsula to land in Yemen. On paper, this was a mission meant to protect the Himyarites against the growing might of the Sassanid Empire. However, the grander motive was to establish Sassanian influence over these distant lands and their important trade. Thus it was that Nauzad, son of King Khusro I, led the mission in person. However, he would be slain in the early fighting. Command now passed to Wariz, a Sassanian general of Daylamite origin. In vengeance for the slaying of his lord, he and the Daylamites confronted the Axumites at the Battle of Hadramaut, defeated their army, killed their king, and besieged their city Sana'a. The end result was a crushing victory, and the Sassanids withdrew their expedition. However, the Axumites would return 5 years later, once more overrunning the region. In response, another Sassanian expedition was launched. This time, Wariz and his Daylamites were supported by a force of 4,000 men who fought a campaign involving raids, sieges, and pitched battles. Ultimately, Wariz proved victorious, emerging with great riches and the new position as governor of Yemen. His followers and descendants would come to intermarry with the locals, planting the seeds of Daylamite influence in Arab lands. Meanwhile, ongoing wars with Emperor Justin II kept the Daylamites of northern Iran busy. Campaigns were once more undertaken against the Romans and their allies in the mountainous Caucasus and in the fortified northern Mesopotamia. In such matters, we yet again hear authors such as Agathias characterized the Daylamites as skillful warriors in close combat. Thus, the Roman infantrymen were finally forced to come to terms with a battlefield peer. However, in 589 AD, the Sassanids would be rocked by a 2-year civil war. Here, the Daylamites at first supported the rebellion of Bahram VI against Khusro II. However, this decision was not taken as a black mark on their record. To the contrary, when Khusro II regained the throne, he would actually enlist the Daylamites as members of his personal guard. Around 600 AD, the king selected 4,000 of these elite soldiers from their home in Daylam and resettled them at Ctesiphon. It would be at the imperial capital where they would receive the highest levels of equipment, training, and honors. Chief among these would be the title of Gond-i-Shahansha, or Army of the King of Kings. Over the following decades, the Daylamites would serve their masters well. Yet they did so in a time of Sassanid decline. One of the greatest threats to emerge was the Arabs. In 630 AD, they had claimed control of Sassanid-aligned Yemen, and soon the Rashidun Caliphate was charging out of the peninsula to challenge the Sassanid Empire proper. The timing proved devastating. Recent wars with the Romans and chaotic civil wars had greatly exhausted the Eastern realm's military might. Thus, in 636 BC, when the Arab invaders marched up the Euphrates, the 12-year-old Sassanid king Yazdajid III held sway over a greatly diminished territory and army. We should therefore consider with some skepticism the Arab claims of inflated troop counts at the decisive Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. Yet, even with corrected projections, it was nonetheless a massive affair, featuring at least around 40,000 soldiers. Here, the combatants faced off across the sprawling plains which flanked a crossing of the Atik River, a branch of the Euphrates. Among the Sassanid elephants, cavalry, and infantry divisions stood the Gond-i-Shahansha, who fought bravely in the dramatic multi-day confrontation. Steel met steel in this clash for the fate of the empire. Ultimately, the forces of the Caliphate proved victorious, with Arab sources claiming that the Daylamite guardsmen now defected to the invaders and converted to Islam. Yet, while the Sassanid Empire would go on to fall before the caliphs, the tribes of Daylam stubbornly resisted their invasion. In fact, they would go on to proudly control their homeland for several centuries to come. Eventually, however, the Daylamites would once more begin offering their military services to their neighbors as mercenaries. So well recognized was their martial prowess that by the 10th century, Daylamite infantry would feature heavily in the army of the caliphs and, as had occurred with the prior Sassanids, it became customary for the Daylamites to serve as elite personal guards to their great kings. Thus, we have witnessed half a millennia of history attesting to the vaunted status of the Daylamites. Without question, they were great warriors whose role as heavy infantry forces makes them all the more unique in a world otherwise dominated by archers and cavalry. Such a legacy should not be forgotten or overlooked, especially as the proud martial status of these northern Iranians endures to this day. We hope you've appreciated this exploration of the woefully underappreciated history of the Sassanids and their impressive military. Please let us know which units you'd like to see covered next, and be sure to head over to our Patreon, where you can catch sneak peeks of upcoming content and download the amazing art for each episode. A huge thanks to our current members for supporting the channel, and a big shout out to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. We couldn't have done it without this team and this community. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.